Charv through the door. "Get out of my restaurant right now, before I call the police." Those words were spoken to a woman who had just walked through the front door of Hargrove's, Forshid Monivore, the most talked about fine dining establishment in downtown Vancouver. She hadn't raised her voice. She hadn't touched anything. She was simply standing there, still in her winter coat, shouldered her, snow melting off the shoulders of her parka, holding a small canvas bag from the Granville Island market. Floorman who said it was Derek Holloway, floor manager of Hargrove's for 11 years. He said it like he meant it. He had every right in the world. If you think you've heard this story before, keep watching. Because what happened next changed everything for Derek, for the restaurant, and for every single person who witnessed it that night. Before we get into it, if you're new here, welcome to Heirloom Tales. Stories about dignity, resilience, and the moments that define who we really are. Hit that like button if these stories means something to you, and subscribe so you never miss one. Now, let's talk about Marguerite Osibonsu. Marguerite Osibonsu was 53 years old, born in Accra, and raised in Mississaugas, a resident of Vancouver's east side. She was not a flashy woman. She drove a 2009 Honda Civic with a cracked rear bumper she kept meaning to fix. She bought her groceries on Tuesday mornings because the crowds were thinner. She wore her hair natural, kept her nails short, and owned exactly one piece of fine jewelry. A gold chain her mother had given her the year before she passed, thin as a thread, almost invisible against her dark skin. Rocher. On the evening of February 14th, Marguerite was not dressed for a special occasion. The door. She was wearing dark jeans, her favorite cream-colored turtleneck, and the parka she'd owned for 6 years. A practical thing, moss green, slightly faded at the cuffs. She had come straight from a meeting in Kitsilano and hadn't had time to go home and change. She didn't think she needed to. She had, after all, been to Hargrove's dozens of times, just never through the front door. Muktri. Hargrove's sat on West Georgia Street like it had always been there, which it mostly had. The building itself dated back to 1923, former textile merchant's storehouse, with original brick walls and ceiling beams that the interior designer had wisely left alone. The restaurant had opened inside it 14 years ago, local affair from the renovation. And from the very first night, it had been exactly the kind of place Vancouverites described as an institution, while secretly fearing they'd never get a reservation. Tros, white tablecloths, a wine list that ran to 47 pages, a tasting menu that changed with the season and cost $220 before tax and gratuity. It was also, for the last 9 years, quietly and entirely owned by Marguerite Osibonsu. But Derek didn't know that. Derek had never been told, and that, as it turned out, was a very significant oversight. From before. She had come in that evening because her executive assistant, a young man named Preetham Nair, had called her that afternoon with a small problem. One of the walk-in units was cycling irregularly. Probably a compressor issue, probably nothing catastrophic, but the head chef, Marcus Villeneuve, Moster, wanted someone with authority to sign off on an emergency maintenance call before he'd let the technician in after hours. It was a Tuesday, Valentine's Day. The dining room would be full. Marguerite had sighed, told Preetham she'd stop by on her way home, and thought nothing more of it. She pushed open the heavy front door at 7:42 in the evening. The dining room was warm and golden, exactly the way she'd always wanted it. Every table full. Candles. The low hum of conversation and the kind of soft jazz she'd argued for with the original sound designer 12 years ago, Kosher. When this had all still been blueprints and borrowed money and hope, stood just inside the entrance, and took a breath the way she always did when she came in. Not with pride, exactly, but with something close to it. Something quieter. She didn't get to stand there long. Derek Holloway appeared from between two tables, moving fast, the way he always moved, like a man who believed urgency was a virtue in itself. 41. Barrel-chested. Cropter. With close-cropped hair, going silver at the temples, and the practiced smile of someone who had learned early that the right expression could substitute for the right words in most situations. Smile did not appear this evening. He looked at Marguerite, at her parka, at the canvas bag from Granville Island, at her face. Ma'am. His voice was already clipped. Do you have a reservation? Lumberman. I don't need one, Marguerite said pleasantly. I'm here to see Marcus. There's a maintenance issue in. The kitchen is not open to the public. Derek stepped slightly to the left, positioning himself between her and the dining room. If you're here about a delivery, service entrance is on Hornby. Marguerite blinked. I'm not here about a delivery. Then I'll need you to make a reservation through our website if you'd like to dine with us. Bolter. Our next available. Derek. She said his name with the calm of someone who had used it before, though he clearly didn't register this. My name is Marguerite Bonsu. I need to speak with Marcus Villeneuve. It's about the walk-in unit. Preetham Nair called me this afternoon. Something flickered across Derek's face. Not recognition. Something else. Moved to the door. A kind of doubling down that happens in a person when they've already committed to a version of events, and new information is arriving too fast to integrate. I don't know who called you, he said. Staff matters are handled through HR. And if I'm not staff, ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to step outside. The couple at the nearest table, a man in a charcoal blazer, a woman in a burgundy dress, had stopped talking. Not obviously. But they had stopped. Restaurant, Marguerite said. She said it quietly. Not as an accusation, as a fact. Derek stared at her for a moment that stretched uncomfortably long. Then he laughed. Not a big laugh. A small, missive exhale, the kind that's worse than a big one. Ma'am. This establishment is owned by the Hargrove Hospitality Group. The Hargrove Hospitality Group, Marguerite said, moneyed her, is a numbered company registered in British Columbia. I am the sole director and shareholder. I have been since 2016. I can show you the articles of incorporation if that would help, but I left them in my other coat. She had meant that last part as a small joke. Derek did not find it funny. I'm going to have to ask you to leave, he said again. Louder this time. A little harder, or I will call the police. And that was when he said it. What he actually said. What this is really about, ordered her. He leaned in, not close enough to touch her, but close enough that she could smell the coffee on his breath, and dropped his voice in a way that was somehow worse than shouting. We both know why you're really here, he said, and we both know you don't belong in a place like this. The room had gone quiet. Not all at once. These things never happen all at once. But table by table, the way a tide goes out. Time, Marguerite answered. The only sound in Hargrove's was the jazz, still playing, indifferent and soft. She looked at Derek Holloway for a long moment. Call Marcus, she said. Please. I will not call Marcus. Her voice did not rise. It did not need to. Moultrie the mature. And I'm going to sit down. She walked past him to the small bench beside the maître de stand. A bench she had specifically requested during the renovation, because she'd thought it would be useful for guests waiting for their tables. And she sat down, set her canvas bag on her lap, and took out her phone. Derek did not call Marcus through the door. What Derek did was walk to the front door, open it, and stand beside it with his arm extended, like a man who had decided that posture could settle the matter. Ma'am, I've asked you politely. Several diners were now watching, openly. A woman at a table near the window had her phone in her hand. Marguerite was not looking at Derek. She was looking at her own phone, scrolling through her contacts. She found the one she wanted and pressed call. It rang twice. Marguerite. Marcus Villeneuve's voice, warm and a little tired. The kitchen was in full Valentine's service, and she knew it. You're here? I'm in the front of house, she said. There seems to be some confusion. Pause. What kind of confusion? Your floor manager has asked me to leave the premises. Twice. And has now opened the front door for me. The silence that followed was very different from the first one. Or do not move, Marcus said. Teacher. I'm coming out. She heard him before she saw him. The slap of kitchen clogs on the hardwood floor, the swinging door from the kitchen corridor. And then Marcus Villeneuve himself, 6'2" and still in his chef's whites, the kind of man who filled a doorway. He was 44 years old, Quebecois by birth, and one of the most respected chefs in the city. Marguerite was Margar. He had also worked for Marguerite for 9 years and considered her, as he had once told a journalist without giving her name, the best employer he'd ever had. He stopped when he saw the scene. Derek, still holding the door open. Marguerite sitting on the bench with her canvas bag, the dining room watching. Derek. Marcus's voice was flat and precise. Close the door. Derek turned. Something in his face shifted. Marcus, I was just. Close the door. Derek closed it, crossed the room and stood in front of Marguerite, with an expression that she recognized as carefully controlled fury. I'm so sorry, he said quietly. I'm so sorry you had to deal with this. It's fine, she said, which was what she always said, because the alternative required more energy than she currently had. It is absolutely not fine. He turned. Derek, Lord, come here, please. And here is where it happened. The moment that the couple near the window would later describe in a post that was shared, by the following Friday, more than 60,000 times. Derek Holloway walked over slowly, still wearing the expression of a man who believed he had done nothing wrong, who perhaps suspected he was about to be vindicated, who thought, maybe, through the door, that Marcus was about to explain to this woman, politely but firmly, that she needed to leave. Marcus said, Herr, this is Marguerite Aussi Bonsu. She owns this restaurant. She owns this building. She signs my paycheck and yours. She has done so for the past 9 years. Do you understand what I'm telling you? Marguerite looked at Derek. The dining room held its breath. She didn't say. Derek started. She said it twice, said the woman in the burgundy dress, across the room. Clear, calm, carrying easily in the silence. Told you twice. Derek's mouth closed. Marcus pulled out his phone, opened a contact, and turned the screen toward Derek. The contact was labeled Marguerite, owner. The staff directory, Marcus said, Oprah's door, has had her name and photograph in it since the day I started. It is in the orientation binder that every new hire receives. I don't know if you read it, but it exists. Derek's face had done something complicated and difficult to watch. The confidence was gone. Something that looked like a man trying to locate an exit in a room that had no exits. I think, Marguerite said, standing up from the bench and smoothing her parka, that we should go check on that walk-in unit. Marcus, is the technician here? He arrived 20 minutes ago. I had him wait in the back. Good! Good! She picked up her canvas bag. Thank you. She walked toward the kitchen corridor, past the maitre d' stand, past Derek, Goldman hurry, past the tables of people who were watching her with the full attention that expensive restaurants usually make you pay very well for. She did not hurry. Kohler. She had never been a woman who hurried when she didn't need to. At the kitchen door, she paused and turned back just for a moment. Mr. Holloway, she said, friends. Please make sure our guests on table 7 get their next course. Pushed through the door and was gone. Now, if you think the story ends there, you don't know how these things work. Stay with me. The post went up that night. It was the woman in the burgundy dress. Her name was Simone Arcand, a high school vice principal from North Vancouver who had come in with her husband to celebrate their anniversary. She hadn't filmed it. She didn't have footage. Spoke a door. What she had was a witness's account, written at 1 in the morning when she couldn't sleep, posted to a community Facebook group with 3,000 members. By morning, it was somewhere else. By afternoon, it was somewhere else again. By Thursday, 2 local news outlets had picked it up. By Friday, a national one. Marguerite did not post anything herself. She did not give interviews. What she did was go to work, answer her emails, and have a long, quiet conversation with her lawyer, a woman named Patricia Okafor, who had been her counsel for 15 years, and who had, upon hearing the story, wrote for firm, said very little, and then begun typing very quickly. Derek Holloway was suspended the morning after the incident, pending review. The review took 3 days. On the 4th day, his employment with the Hargrove Hospitality Group was terminated. Chrome Unavator. The official statement cited a violation of conduct policies and a failure to adhere to the company's standards of respect and inclusion. He did not comment publicly. His LinkedIn profile, blocked through the door, which had listed Hargroves as his employer for 11 years, went quiet. The technician, as it turned out, had correctly identified a failing compressor seal in the walk-in unit. It was repaired by 10 o'clock that same evening. The kitchen never went down, finished without incident. Valentine's service, and Marcus, by all accounts, sent out one of the better tasting menus of the year. Marguerite drove home in her 2009 Civic, stopped at a red light on Main Street, and sat there for a moment after it turned green. Not because she hadn't noticed. Because she had, and she needed a second. She had built this thing from nothing. From a vision and a loan, and years of Saturday mornings, going over spreadsheets at her kitchen table before anyone else in the building was awake. She had hired people, trained people, trusted people. She had poured every careful, hard-won dollar of her savings into a building that smelled like brick dust and possibility, and she had made something real out of it. And a man who had worked in that building for 11 years had looked at her face, her coat, her canvas bag, and decided, in the space of a single glance, that she didn't belong there. The light changed again. She drove home. Here's the thing about Marguerite Osi Bonsu that the Post didn't mention, because Simone Arcan didn't know it, and Marguerite would never have said it herself. She had been through something like this before. Not at Hargroves. Real Damashi. Somewhere else, years earlier, when she was just starting out and had gone to a bank on West Pender to discuss a commercial loan, through the core. The advisor she had been assigned, a young man who had clearly never been assigned a client, who looked like her, had spent 45 minutes asking her if she'd considered starting with something smaller, and less ambitious. Something more appropriate to her situation. She had not gotten that loan from Rillenavdor. She had gone to a different bank, and then a different one, and then eventually to a credit union whose manager had looked at her business plan and said, simply, "This is good. When do you want to start?" She had started then, and she had never stopped. After the story ran nationally, Marguerite received a call from a journalist at a Toronto paper who wanted to profile her. Not about the incident, but about the business itself. The restaurants, the properties, the 22 years of work. For 2 days. Marguerite thought about it for 2 days and then said yes, on one condition. The story would focus on what she had built, not what had been done to her. The journalist agreed. The piece ran on a Sunday, with a photograph of Marguerite standing in the kitchen at Hargroves, arms crossed, chef's whites hanging in the background, the original brick wall behind her. The headline was, "She owns the building. She always did." Gobisham. Within the week, Marguerite received messages from 47 other black business owners across Canada. Women and men, restaurants and retail and consulting firms and